11.
The report on the briefing is set down for consideration. No bills have been introduced, so the House now comes to questions for oral answer. And the first question stands in the name of Dr. Russel Norman.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Dr. Russel Norman.
Mr. Speaker, this question was originally accepted by the Clerk's office with the word secretive in front of the word meeting. After intervention from the Prime Minister's office, it was changed. I seek leave to ask the original question as accepted by the Clerk's office.
Order. That's not, as I understand, the situation at all. All questions require validation. The validation provided for that original wording was a statement by the member's own colleague. The opinion of a colleague hardly meets the requirement for validation. Question number one, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was nonetheless secretive, my friends. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks, at his meeting with the boss of American oil giant Anadarko in November 2011, was the issue of making deep-sea oil drilling a permitted activity under the EEZ legislation raised?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no. My memory of the meeting was it was a courtesy call by the head of Anadarko to express his interest in New Zealand in relation to what they may or may not want to do here. Secondly, it was an opportunity for an update on their activities internationally. He gave me a review of what happened in the Gulf. As for the member's assertion it was a secretive meeting, I hate to tell them the bad news, but it happened in the afternoon in the government offices. By the way, I had to walk along Queen Street to go in there. When you're on TV every night, a few people notice it, and there were a whole lot of civil servants working up there, so it wasn't that secretive.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will he rule out making deep-sea oil drilling a permitted activity under the EEZ Act regulations currently being drafted, meaning it won't require a resource consent?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, and that is because we're in the process of going through the public consultation that the member referred to. At the point at which that consultation is completed and the Cabinet has some advice, it will then need to make a decision about what happens next.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that under the EEZ Act, permitted activities can proceed as of right with almost no oversight, how will the public, councils and iwi have a say on specific deep-sea drilling proposals if the government makes it a permitted activity?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, no, I think the member is misleading Parliament. In fact, if something is permitted, there would still be quite considerable conditions.
Point of order, Dr. Russel Norman.
Mr. Speaker, it's quite a serious allegation to suggest that I'm misleading Parliament. I was simply giving my interpretation of how the law works. The Minister is perfectly able to contradict it if he disagrees.
Well, order. The wording the Prime Minister used is very interesting. An issue arose just last week around the use of false information. The Prime Minister didn't say the member intentionally misled Parliament. The Prime Minister just said the member was misleading Parliament. In other words, providing information in the Prime Minister's view that was incorrect. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. To finish his answer.
Mr. Speaker, in my opinion, the member is misleading the Parliament with that claim. There would still be an enormous amount of conditions that would apply for permitted activity.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister confirm that there may well be conditions, but if it is a permitted activity under the EEZ regulations or Act, there will be no need for a public consultation about specific deep-sea drilling activities?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, it would be too early to conclude that. That's what the public consultation and the process that we're going through is all about at the moment.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Mr. Speaker, so is he aware that Anadarko had a 25% stake in the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico spill, and under his proposal, as a permitted activity, they will be able to drill at similar levels in New Zealand waters without getting a resource consent?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think the first thing that's important is that whatever the rules that apply in the EEZ, and this government's actually filling a gap that previous governments failed to fill, should apply to all companies irrelevant of their history. Yes, it's true that Anadarko had a 25% ownership of the company, or one of the companies that had a problem in the Gulf. I think it's also worth remembering that in the Gulf of Mexico since 1947, 50,000 wells have been drilled, and to the best of my knowledge, the problem in the Gulf was the one major one that most people can remember.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is the point of having an environmental legislative regime for our EEZ if the government is going to enable and allow companies to conduct risky activities there without the scrutiny of a resource consent process, as would be the case if it was a permitted activity?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it depends on a number of factors. For a start, about whether it's an exploration well or whether it's major drilling that's taking place. But there are also, as I said earlier, significant conditions that still apply even if an activity is permitted. This is a government that's actually filling the gap that was left as a void where there were no rules applying and making sure that they do apply. In the case of Taranaki, as has been the case for a very long period of time, actually drilling an exploration well there has been a permitted activity for a very long period of time, and to the best of my knowledge, very successful.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware that Deepwater Horizon was an exploration well in deep water? It's resulted in massive pollution. And how can it make sense to require New Zealanders to apply for a consent to construct a deck in their backyard, but companies involved in risky deep-sea drilling don't require a resource consent from this government?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, deep water is only one factor when it comes to whether a drill operation can actually take place. There are many other factors that one would want to consider. If the member is saying just because it's deep water that drilling under even very good conditions can't take place, that's about as bright as his idea to print money. I happen to have with me a $100 billion Zimbabwean note, which for the record, when they printed this, bought you about a bumper box from Kentucky Fried Chicken and a couple of bottles of Coke. That idea wasn't very good, and this idea of stopping all drilling around New Zealand isn't either.
Question number, I beg your pardon, supplementary question, Moana Maki.
Supplementary to the Prime Minister. In his meeting with Anadarko, did they discuss whether or not the Environmental Protection Authority is planning to contract out all or part of their offshore monitoring and compliance functions, including the possibility of industry self-regulation, as recently revealed on the Energy News website, functions which the Local Government and Environment Select Committee was assured would be carried out by the EPA?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
No.
Dr. Russell Norman, point of order.
I seek leave to table a paper from the International Monetary Fund recommending that small open economies target the exchange rate as well as inflation for their monetary policy.
Order, 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 order. The member has a right to call a point of order and to seek leave to table a document. Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Point of order, the Right Honourable
Prime Minister. I seek leave to table my $100 billion Zimbabwean note, because it's not really worth much anyway, as it wasn't when they printed it.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? Did I hear objection? I did hear objection. There is objection. Question number 2, the Leader of the Opposition, David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Prime Minister, does he stand by